What is the most bizarre or unexplained thing you have ever witnessed that you still cannot explain to this day? In 2016, we had just moved back to the States after living overseas for 10 years. My daughter was born here but remembered nothing of it. When she was tiny, before we moved away, we would go to the local mall sometimes, to the play area and to ride the carousel. One afternoon in September, we drove over there so she could see the old neighborhood, and we went by the mall. It was almost completely shuttered, signs gone, parking lot empty, only a couple of stores left, food court shut down, carousel and play area gone. Even the theater across the road had closed. It was sad. This used to be a destination, supermall. When we got home, I told my husband about it, and he wanted to see, so the next day he and I drove there. What I saw was the only thing that has ever caused me to gape, mouth open. Fully open mall, signs intact, anchor stores still there, every space had a store, full of people, carousel going, play area full of kids, food court open, across the street the theater was lit up and people all around. I was speechless, literally. My husband started to tease me but saw the confusion on my face and stopped. We got back in the car and went home. My daughter fully thought I was joking until I took her back there. She was speechless. All of this is true. I do not know what happened that day, but it did happen. Neither my daughter nor I have viewed reality in the same way since. This happened while visiting my grandparents in upstate New York one summer in the early to mid-90s. We were driving back to their place from a relative's late at night and stopped at a red light. I looked out the window down the cross street, and in the middle of the street was a full-grown female lion. Not a puma, but a straight-up lion. I said, "Lion," and pointed, and my grandparents also said something like, "Oh shit, that's a lion," and drove off. I remember my grandpa called the sheriff to report it, but they kind of just made fun of him because why would a lion be wandering a small town upstate? Even if it was just a puma, they hadn't lived in the area for more than a century by that point. I watched a friend's dog for a month and grew pretty close to him over that time. A few months later, I dreamt that the dog came over to visit, and we played fetch, went on walks, and just had an all-around good time. I texted my friend in the morning because it was a cool dream. They had put him down the night prior. I was sitting on top of Mount Bonnell in Austin with a buddy of mine. This was probably back in 1995 or so. We were there just hanging out and talking, and we noticed a light that just seemed to be levitating, just floating, not moving at all for several minutes. We thought it was a helicopter, but it was close enough and there was no noise. Within a split second, it went diagonally upwards, shot backwards, and then back upwards, and it was gone. It basically made an upward Z pattern and was gone. It happened so quickly that I did not even know how to respond, and after maybe 10 to 15 seconds, the friend I was with asked me if I saw that. We both thought we were crazy at the time, but we both saw it. In 2001, I lost my 17-year-old son in an automobile accident. About 6 months later, a girl who went to school with my younger son told me she had a dream about my late son. She did not know him well, but I was her cheerleading advisor. She said in her dream he came into the room and asked her to do him a favor, "Tell my mom I love her, I miss her, and I'm okay." About a year later, another girl who had gone to his school but was not really in his circle sent me an email. She had gotten my email from a family member of mine that she had recently met. She said she had a dream she needed to tell me about. She said in the dream my son had come into the room and asked her to do him a favor, "Tell my mom I love her, I miss her, and that I'm okay." I was very stunned, to say the least. A few months after that, one of his best friends called. She had joined the military after she graduated, and we had not spoken in a while. She wanted to check in on me, and she wanted to tell me about a dream she had. It was word for word, the same dream. 3 people who did not communicate with each other had the same dream, with the same message to me from my son. I do believe he sent the message to me in a way he thought I would really get. I kind of laughed thinking about it because I had many other instances where I felt I had received a message, but this little voice would say, "Maybe that's you wishing it," or, "Is that just a coincidence?" But then, when these 3 people gave me this particular message, it really felt like it was him. I figure he was like, "Oh good grief, what do I have to do to make this woman finally see it's me? Thank you all again." He was exceptional. He loved all people, rooted for the underdogs, and smiled like a sunbeam. He lived and loved more in 17 years than many people do in 80. I'm grateful for the honor of being his mom, then and now. I could talk about growing up in a haunted house, but honestly, the thing that haunts me a bit to this day was when I was having surgery and I had an out-of-body experience. I felt strange during it, not bothered at all. I just knew things and everything was fine. It was like something I had done before and felt like waiting for food at a fast food place. No worries, no stress, nothing. But when I went back to where my body was awake mid-surgery and screaming and crying, "Where is he? Where is he? Don't leave me. Please don't leave me." I remember just kind of smiling and going back in, and all that stopped. The doctor confirmed this happened with me too, that I was ranting those things, then suddenly smiled and stopped calmly, apologized, then let them do their thing. Seeing yourself cry out for yourself out of body was freaky as hell, and I have no idea what that could mean. It's like a horror movie body snatcher story, but I was the snatcher or something riding along with another person. It still creeps me out to this day. Several years ago, I had taken my son to school and was heading home. Suddenly, an animal came out of the trees on one side of the road and very quickly crossed in front of me. It was large, running on all four legs, and appeared to be sloped forward like one of those dumb-looking cars that has much bigger wheels on the back than on the front. It looked wrong, and my brain could not process what kind of animal it could be. Still no idea. Years before that, I was dating a woman who lived in a city a couple of towns over from mine. It was about a 40-minute drive from me, and I often took a back road to get there. This road passed an old plantation that was a tourist attraction, so they had a big sign. Passing the plantation was a halfway point for me going to her house. One night, I was heading over and noted as I passed the big plantation sign, "Yay, halfway there," and continued down the road. A few minutes later, "Yay, halfway there," as I passed the big plantation sign. Wait a minute. So that was weird. I was working at a hospital, and it was nighttime. The elevators run along a glass corner, and if it is night and you are on the last elevator, you can see the reflection of the hall, say if someone is waiting. I was on that last elevator, got to the main floor, and the doors opened up. I saw a blonde lady in all black with a small sports-style stroller waiting for the elevator in that glass reflection. I fully intended to hold the door for her, so I double-checked the glass to see if she would start walking, so I could hold the door from closing. I checked even a third time at the glass, still standing there. I breached out of the elevator and started to hold my arm out to hold that door since she did not move. Well, no one was there. I looked back at the reflection, nothing. I went to the T in the hall, still no one. I was sort of panicked and immediately called a coworker in case of the worst to tell him what I witnessed. When I was 16, I took a trip with my grandma during the summer to spend a week at my cousin's house. My cousin lived in an old house in an old mining town in the Sierra foothills near the California/Nevada border. They had talked about seeing someone in the dust of the driveway as they drove off, and of seeing someone peek over the stairs while they were watching TV. I did not think much of it. Then, one of the mornings I was there that week, I woke up just as the sun was coming up, and there was a man standing in the hallway. He was looking into the other room across the hall where my grandma and young, maybe 5 years old, cousin were sleeping. He was covered in a dark blue light, and it looked like he was wearing a button-up shirt and jeans. I could not see his face because he was facing the other bedroom. There was also nothing below his knees. I could see the top of his head down to his knees. I assumed I was dreaming, so I closed my eyes hard and opened them, trying to wake up, but he was still there. Then I rubbed my eyes hard with my hands, but he was still there. Finally, as I was staring at him, he just vanished. This entire time I was not afraid. I woke up my cousin that I was sharing the room with, and we got up for the day. I cannot explain it, and I know I was not dreaming. Years ago, while working late at a small-town radio station, I stumbled upon an eerie coincidence. I decided to air an oldies song that I had been humming all day, not one of our usual tracks. Shortly after it started playing, an old man called in, his voice quivering with emotion. It turned out he was the original artist of the song, a one-hit wonder from decades back. He said he had not heard his song on the radio in over 30 years and just happened to tune in that night while driving through our town. The song was his late wife's favorite, and it was her birthday. The odds of that happening were so astronomical, it sent shivers down both our spines. It is moments like that, when the universe aligns in the most hauntingly beautiful way, that remind me just how mysterious life can be. I work the graveyard shift and sometimes take my lunches in my car to get away from my coworkers. I was walking back inside at 4:08 a.m. to clock in at 4:10. I had a habit of looking up at the sky to try and see the stars, but in the part of the city I was in, you could only see a few very bright ones. Anyways, I was looking up when suddenly I saw the sky light up. It was like another moon had formed, as bright if not brighter than the moon and just as big, and surrounding it was a green aura that reminded me of the northern lights. It traveled upwards, the green hue traveling behind it. I stood in awe, scared that if I dared to pull out my phone to record, I would miss even a second of it. The entire event lasted maybe 3 to 5 seconds and has been burned into my mind ever since. December 17, 2023, at 4:08 a.m. We were up at the lake cabin around the fire one night, looking at constellations and talking about the day. All of a sudden, every dog within earshot started barking intensely. Just as suddenly, they all quit, completely silent. We were all looking for something that could possibly be causing all the ruckus, and when they went silent, every star in the sky was gone. Total blackness. There was not a sound. Not a bug, not a frog, absolutely nothing. About 3 to 4 seconds later, the stars reappeared, and all the lake noises went back to normal. All 4 of us saw and heard the same thing. My husband, boyfriend at the time, was about to take a nap next to me. I saw him mess with his phone for a minute, and then we both took a nap. When we woke up, his phone was nowhere to be found. There was no one in the house besides us. We looked everywhere for this phone and could not find it. He loses things a lot, so we chalked it up to him misplacing it somewhere. About an hour later, I got a call on my phone from my boyfriend's friend Smuff. Apparently, someone had found my boyfriend's phone on the side of the road or in the road, I do not know. I did not get a detailed story. But they found it about 2 miles from our house on the way to town. Someone found it, took it to the main gas station on that road, and the gas station clerk called the last number dialed in the phone, which was Smuff. He did not have a lock on his phone at the time. So he came to pick it up and called me about it, and we got it back from him. Still to this day, we call that instance the wormhole incident. No matter how many times we have gone over it and talked it through, nothing about that whole thing makes any sense. 12 years ago, on a road trip back from a Blink-182 concert in Los Angeles, we were driving east through Arizona, headed back to Ohio on a 33-hour road trip because the other guy just loved Blink so much that somehow we had to do this massively long trip for just one concert. But that is neither here nor there. The real point was spending time with these 2 girls. I was driving at the point this happened. In the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the night, we came to a stop behind a bunch of cars waiting on some construction. The 4 of us were talking for a bit as we sat there, 2 girls, 2 guys, and I distinctly remember rotating yellow lights on the construction vehicles and lots of red light from all the rear car lights. A few songs played while we were joking and laughing, and one girl was smoking. Eventually, we were like, haven't we been here forever? And we started looking around. It is construction, who knows what the delay is. So we wait. It gets to 20 minutes, 30 minutes. Eventually, I am like, are the construction guys even moving? I get out of the car, and there are orange cones lined up everywhere. I am picking my way through. I swear to you, there is nobody in the construction vehicles. They are just sitting there. I am like, what the hell? This traffic jam is pointless, we need to just go around, and I look at the other cars to try to tell the drivers. I swear to you, there was nobody in the cars either. We had just been sitting in a traffic jam in the middle of nowhere in the middle of the night behind a bunch of cars and construction vehicles that were on, but nobody was in them. I jumped back in the car, and we took off like a bat out of hell. But to this day, I have no idea what that was about. It was not a hallucination, I was not asleep, all 4 of us saw this. Looking in other cars and seeing nobody in any of them. I did not stop to see if there were tracks in the sand or anything. Just F that. 5 years ago, I had surgery related to a cancer diagnosis. They took out my gallbladder, something like 50% of my liver, bile ducts, the source of the cancer, and rerouted some plumbing so bile could still flow and allow normal digestion. Some days later, that plumbing failed, in my surgeon's words, disintegrated, causing a bile leak into my abdomen. My surgeon said he had never seen that happen to someone who had not undergone a lot of chemotherapy. I had not had any other treatment by this point. So he had to go back in 5 days later in an emergency surgery to disconnect what remained of the plumbing and clear an infection that put me into sepsis, again. During the surgery, he had to put in a biliary drain bag which was to stay in an indefinite amount of time until my body healed enough to attempt the first surgery again. I was in such bad shape that the surgeon on call when I was rushed to the ER said at a post-op visit that he did not expect me to make it out of the OR alive, and my main surgeon confirmed this some time later. It started off needing to be drained of bile several times a day. Fast forward to a post-op follow-up at 3 months. The bag was not filling up with bile, and we began to worry it was clogged. Something did not add up because I was not symptomatic for excess bile. We knew it was not clogged because a nurse friend of ours had flushed it with saline and confirmed it had good flow. So at that follow-up, my wife and I started describing things to my surgeon, and he asked a few follow-up questions. With a slightly bewildered look on his face, he said something to the effect of, "There's a very slight chance that your body has made that connection again on its own. If so, you won't need another surgery for this. It's exceedingly rare though. I've only read of it happening once and in someone much younger than you, something like 17. I was 38 at the time for perspective." He ordered scans after the new year, and the scans confirmed his suspicions. When he called my wife to share the good news, he explained it all to her, then said, "This shouldn't have been able to happen. I have no medical or scientific explanation for this. No physician I have talked to since has had an explanation either," with one, an acquaintance of mine, looking me in the eye after I told him and said, "That doesn't happen." Not in the sense of doubting the story, but more in the sense he had never heard of it happening either. Fast forward to a couple of years ago. I have since moved, and my surgeon texts me and says he's coming through town with his family and wanted to get coffee. I had been sending him cards on the surgery anniversary and Christmas cards. So my wife and 2 kids and his wife and 3 met at a Starbucks for a couple of hours. He confirmed the rarity of my case, even 3 years later. He said he called up 2 former, since retired, mentors of his from his med school residency fellowship days and explained my case and asked them if they had ever seen or heard of something like this happening, and neither had. I'll add that my surgeon was at the time the chief of multi-organ transplant surgery at the major hospital system in a big city, and is now the surgical director for liver transplant surgery at a cancer center. I was about 17, so this is over 20 years ago. I woke up in my room and started getting ready for school. I heard my mom yelling for me to hurry up. She sounded unusually angry. I started going down the hall towards her voice as she still rambled in anger. I could hear her doing the laundry as I got closer. I turned the corner to the laundry room, and my mom was disheveled looking, still wearing her nightgown and robe, and running the dryer and loading the washer in a frantic manner. It spooked me because this was very out of character. In the morning, she was always showered and dressed and heading out to work. She dressed up with nice clothes and heels and makeup and jewelry, the works. But here she was mad, sloppy, groggy, and throwing clothes around while yelling at me to get going and complaining about my behavior. It is not that my mom did not yell at me, I was far from a golden child, but the way she was acting was just so off. I really felt uncomfortable. I retreated down the hall and headed down the stairs to the first level. I could still hear the laundry and her saying stuff behind me. But as I got to the bottom of the stairs, around the corner out of my view in the kitchen, I heard my mom start talking to me in a cheery voice. I froze in my tracks. The voice was from the kitchen and not from upstairs. My heart racing, I went around the corner into the kitchen, and there was my mom. She was happy, bright, and wearing her usual work outfit. She noticed I was beside myself. I did not say a word. I ran upstairs to the laundry room. Silence. Empty. Both machines cold and empty. I never told my mom anything. I just rushed out the door to my car and left for school. It freaked me out then and still does when I think of it now. Was I hallucinating? Maybe, but why and so vivid and never again anything like it? After my mum died, I asked her to find my original wedding ring if she was still around. I had misplaced it and had not seen it for a year. I wanted to know if she was still around in some form. I had forgotten my request until one evening weeks later when I noticed something strange in my budgie's cage. There was my wedding ring. It was on my budgie's toy rope, hanging from her cage. In order to extract it, I had to unscrew the toy rope and remove it to get the ring. My mum knew I am not superstitious and would likely rationalize simply finding my ring. I cannot explain how my ring made it into the cage onto the rope except my mum somehow did it from the grave. I cannot explain it otherwise. This is the only thing like this that has ever happened to me in 53 years on this planet. I maintain an open critical mind. Summer Camp, 1992. I was 9 years old. This was in Texas. Hiding in the woods during Capture the Flag, I was on the edge of this big, clear-cut high-voltage power line easement but still in the shadows. The moon was bright, and I could see what I thought was an older kid or maybe a counselor running at full speed through the moonlight. Not wanting to be seen, I crouched lower, and as this person approached, I could see they were very big. Like just on the side of too big. I got scared and hid my face, not wanting to look at them. As they passed me, they sounded like an animal. Like a bull almost. Heavy footsteps and snorting. When it passed me, I looked up and could see the shadow. The head was elongated, even beyond the distortion the moonlight's angle was causing. It was tall and wider than it should have been. No idea who or what that was. My grandfather and I loved to fish. I still do. As he got older, we would go to a small community pond just behind the house because he could not drive to the main lake anymore. As he aged, he got Alzheimer's and was eventually put into a nursing home because my grandmother could not care for him anymore. He was constantly running away and would be found just walking down the road, headed to the lake, because he wanted to go fishing. We took him fishing a few times while he was there, but it was difficult and we had to stop. They wound up putting an alarm ankle bracelet on him after yet another escape, which took 2 days to find him. Yeah, negligent home, but this was the early 80s and things were just different then. Anyways, one day I was sick and stayed home from school. I was about 10 years old, when our doorbell rang. I was laying on the couch, and my mom asked me to get it as she was in the bathroom. I opened the door, and Grandpa was standing there asking if I wanted to go fishing with him. I kind of freaked and ran to get my mom, leaving him on the porch but did not close the door. Mom immediately came out, and when we got to the door, he was gone. We both walked the whole block looking for him, and when we could not find him, Mom called the home to let them know what happened. She was furious because he had that alarm on and it was supposed to have alerted them the second he stepped outside. They were, of course, confused and said they would check on it. She got a phone call several minutes later, and they said that they found him lying on his bed. He had passed away in his sleep. Mom and I were messed up for a long time after this and could only assume it was his way of saying goodbye. That was hard to type through my tears. When I was in junior high, I went to a remote camp with school. One day, we canoed to a small island to camp out for the night. It was so dark with no light pollution, so we were stargazing around a small campfire. I am not sure which we noticed first, but we heard a loud humming noise and noticed an odd star formation above us. There were 4 stars in the shape of a diamond with a star right in the middle. We wondered what it might be while trying to figure out where that humming sound was coming from. We were in such an isolated place. Suddenly, the 4 stars forming the diamond shot off in different directions, leaving just the middle star. After a moment, that star shot off too, and it was instantly eerily silent. We did not sleep well that night. When I was around 10 years old, I woke up early on a Saturday morning to watch cartoons. I have 4 other siblings, so I wanted to make sure I got a bowl of cereal before it was gone. Our house was pretty small. The living room was separated by a wall with 2 ways in and out of the kitchen. I went to the kitchen and put my bowl on the counter. I went to the living room to sit on the couch. Before I could even turn on the TV, I heard the bowl hit the kitchen floor, and I could not move. I tried to get up from the couch, and I was frozen. I do not remember being afraid. I was mostly confused as to why I could not move. After about 10 seconds, I shot up from the couch and walked to the kitchen. The bowl was still spinning in the middle of the floor. That is when I became afraid. I slowly backed up to the kitchen wall that led to the landing area. The room I shared with my sister was in the basement. I mustered up the strength to call out her name, all the while keeping my eye on the bowl. She heard me and came up the stairs looking very sleepy, and we both stared at the spinning bowl. It then stopped, and we both looked at each other, and she walked over to it and kicked it. It hit the lower cabinets, and I grabbed it and tossed it in the garbage. That is when my parents came into the kitchen to yell at us about making a bunch of noise. We were just speechless and went back downstairs. I have not thought of this in years. I am hanging out with my sister on Sunday. I might ask her if she remembers anything else. I went on vacation. Unplanned road trip. Just get in and go. No itinerary. Day 3 was at the Rock and Roll History Museum in Ohio. This is about 800 miles away from where I live. I was in the Elvis exhibit and I backed up and bumped into another person. I turned to apologize, and the other person turned to face me. It was my brother, who lives only 40 minutes away from me. He was on an unplanned vacation and had also just decided to take a random road trip without planning anything. He had taken the southern route across, whereas I had taken the northern route, and somehow we managed to wind up in the same place at the same time 800 miles from where we both live, and absolutely no one knew we were going to be there right then. We have zero idea how that coincidence managed to occur. Literally no one, not even ourselves, knew we were going to stop there that day, or be in that exhibit in those spots at that exact moment. I am not a UFO or alien guy, at all, but about 20 years ago, I was watching the Northern Lights with some relatives, and all of us, including 2 former pilots, saw the same thing, a high-altitude trio of lights that went across the sky completely silently in seconds, stopped on a dime, and turned back the other direction. I have talked to those people about it, and they remember it clear as day, but they do not have an explanation for what it was. Too sharp of movement for any known aircraft at the time or now, too high up to be a helicopter or any drone that would have been flying over the area, if it even existed, at the time, too dead silent for it to be any typical aircraft, wrong time of night for any small civilian non-commercial aircraft, and once more, nothing could have stopped on a dime like that as far up as it was and immediately turned around at almost a 180-degree turn instantaneously. Again, not a UFO/alien guy, but that was weird. A wholesome story that takes place when I am an adult and living on my own for several years. One night, I had a dream in which I woke up in my parents' backyard beneath the big maple tree. It was a perfect summer day, and the sun was filtered through the leaves, creating a beautiful pattern in the grass. My dog was napping nearby, and when I looked over at him, he saw me and could speak to me telepathically. He told me to come lay next to him. So we lounged in the grass and talked for a long time about our lives growing up together. He told me he had to leave soon, but he would always remember and appreciate the good life I gave him, and he would always love me. It was sad but beautiful. We said our goodbyes. A few days later, he died. I knew he was very old, and it was probably just my brain creating a scenario to protect me, but it seemed so real and it was so pleasant that I want to believe he somehow visited me that night. Dogs are so special, I bet they could figure it out. The time in high school when a group of us went out to the town cemetery to see the big headstone with a crystal ball on it, because she was a witch that died in the late 1800s. Or something. Standing in front of it, I jokingly said something along the lines of, "I summoned the witch." And then all the lights that illuminated the cemetery turned off. Like within seconds of me saying it. Even one that was up on a water tower across the way. We kind of freaked out. So, we left. As we were driving home, all of the street lights we drove under turned off. Block by block. They turned back on after we passed. Dozens of them, not just a few. This was like 1997. I do not know how to explain it. But I swear on all that is holy that the lights kept turning off as we drove. About 20 years ago, my husband and my kids went on a vacation. We stayed overnight at this motel. We checked in late, and it was dark. We got the kids settled, and I went out to smoke. Across the way, there was a house, lit from the inside, and curtains drawn. I could see the shadow of a woman walking back and forth in front of the window. I sat there for probably 10 minutes, and she never stopped. I went back inside and went to bed. One of the kids woke up, and I went to the car to get her blanket. It was probably 2 or 3. The lady was still walking back and forth. I had sat and studied, and it was not the same repetitive movements. It was a person walking slightly slowly and moving her arms, and it looked completely normal. I think about it all the time. My mom was driving me to my longtime best friend's house. I was older than 16, but do not drive due to disability. My friend and I had been inseparable for years, so we had made this drive across town many times. The ride was uneventful until we entered her neighborhood. The route to her house from there was very simple: take the first right and her house was at the end of the cul-de-sac on the right-hand side. We did that, but, this time, her house was not there. We backtracked, did the same thing and, nope, still not there. I called her, very confused. She told me she would stay on the phone and stand in her front yard so we could spot her. We repeated the route again, nothing. We finally went down the next street just in case we were wrong somehow, but still no dice. As a note, the street sign never changed until we intentionally went down the second street. It always showed her correct street name. At this point, it feels like the Twilight Zone and I am panicking. I am ready to turn around and go home, but we went down her street one last time, and there she was, waiting in her yard. There was no way to loop around to other streets or anything, so I have no idea how we could have missed it, especially when the route was so simple and we had driven it countless times. My friend and I ended up having a bad falling out a few years later and, although it was not anything sinister that caused the break, I still think of this situation and get an uneasy feeling when I see her on social media. Sleep paralysis was not well known when I was a kid, and I am still not sure it can be explained 100% by science. I would lay down for bed and could feel it coming, like laying back into a bathtub full of water. All senses would dull, and sounds would dampen. Sometimes I could see myself as if I was floating above my body. Kind of fun until the voices and chilling wind presences came. The voices would say things that were incredibly dark and more complex than my own vocabulary at that age. Horrifying in that I could not move until the fear overtook everything. This is something that lasted until my early 20s. I could recognize that it was happening and break from the patterns before entering sleep paralysis. Might be able to do it again if I tried, but it is not pleasant. The whole experience is so much more than hand-waving sleep paralysis. Two things. The first is when I was about 4 years old. It seemed like my soul left my body. I vividly remember floating up towards the ceiling and seeing myself lying in bed. I could see a beam of sunlight coming through the curtains and lighting up my body like a spotlight. I continued floating until I was outside, then a bright flash happened, and it felt like I was free falling back down. I landed on top of myself, and when I did, I woke up. The second thing was when I was about 13 years old and was talking to a friend on the phone when it was dark outside. I was just pacing around talking, and I walked over to the window facing the backyard. I opened the curtains just looking, and all of a sudden, the nighttime lit up red. It had to be fireworks, but this was in December in Texas. We do not shoot fireworks before Christmas. I also think it could have been a comet. It just really freaked me out the way it went from nighttime to a big red light. My dead brother spoke to me in a dream. My brother died of an overdose a few years back. I came home for the funeral and stayed in the basement, where he lived for several years. After days of holding it together, I went into the basement alone and sobbed. My mom came down to comfort me. My brother and I had a very complicated/toxic relationship. He was emotionally/mentally abusive our entire lives. That night, I dreamt that I saw my brother's face. I normally do not have vivid dreams and I rarely even remember them. He said, "I'm so sorry, I had no idea people would care this much. I love you and I'm so sorry." The weirdest part, the next morning, before I had a chance to tell my mom about the dream, she mentioned that the gate to the backyard was open that morning. She noticed because her dog almost got out. She said it was very strange because the only time the gate would be used would be to enter the house through the basement. We later joked that if Stephen were to visit me in a dream to say goodbye, of course he would forget to close the gate behind him. My mom passed a few months ago after a battle with cancer. She ended up becoming septic, and it all went downhill really quickly. My brother and I stayed by her side every day while she was in the hospital. She had been unconscious for the entire day, and it was clear the end was coming. That evening, she randomly started reaching up toward the ceiling and smiling. She was communicating with someone, mouthing words and grinning. She opened her eyes one final time, looked at each of us, squinting to discern our faces, and then she fell unconscious again. But here is the weird part. I swear to God I watched her age backwards. Like someone waved a magic wand. Our mom was in her late 60s, and for a few minutes, she looked 25. It was so weird. There was not a damn wrinkle, age spot, anything. She was positively radiant. I remember writing it off as grief playing tricks on me, or a play of light from the TV in the room. A nurse comes in a little while later, and the three of us get to talking about how much time she has left. I forget how he segued into it, but my brother made a comment that it was strange how drastically a person's face could change close to the end, and that mom looked so young. I was like, you saw it, too, and he says, yeah. She looked like how I remember her when I was a kid. She looked beautiful. She was 20 when she had him. I could not believe it, we both saw her de-age before our eyes. I looked it up later, and apparently, it is a real phenomenon. My husband and I went to a music and arts festival in a tiny town a few hours away from the larger city we live in. We decided to buy an original painting while we were there, and we both spotted the one we wanted at the same time. It just caught both of our attention profoundly. The artist did not want to part with it but could tell we were bummed, so she decided to let us buy it. She gave us a business card, and her artist name was Askreddit. A couple of years later, we went out for some drinks and met this guy at the bar. We really hit it off with him and were having great conversations. He asked us to go to his place to hang for a bit, and we decided to go, which we have never ever done before or since. We usually keep to ourselves and do not go to strangers' houses randomly. We were just talking and playing a board game when, out of nowhere, this guy gets up and grabs a singing bowl and starts using it, making it sound pretty cool. He says, "My friend Sydney made this, she is an artist." I asked if she went by Askreddit and pulled out her business card that was still in my wallet. It was her. We were all stunned silent. It is still a completely shocking coincidence that blows my mind to this day and makes me think art can have some kind of transcendent power. I am a trucker, and one night about 6 months into my driving career, I was on some random Texas back road in the middle of nowhere. The kind where there is maybe a town every 150 miles, it seems like. I stopped in an area I dubbed trucker make-a-spots, to do a 30-minute break and to let out my dog. When I was taking out my dog, I saw a red light about 6 to 8 feet in the air out in the bushes about 100 yards from where I was standing. Anyway, long story short, it came out of the bushes even with my yelling that I had a firearm. I did not, and when my dog would not get back into the truck, I had to pick her up and throw her in there. I was able to get the doors locked by the time this thing came crashing into my truck. I left, violated my logbook, and found a better place to take a break. In the morning, you could see a slight dent in the side of my truck in certain light. I have never been able to really find that road or that pull-off again, despite being down in that area hundreds of times since. It was not an all-terrain vehicle, nor was it some idiot with a light on their hat or something else. It was not even a cow or a deer. The fence beside the road was about 13 feet high as well. It was strange and weird, but it scared the shit out of me. During the pandemic, I spent a lot of time alone in Blue Ridge Mountain, Jefferson National Forest. I used to drive off 81 and park, then hike and look for cool little swimming holes and just enjoyed the beauty. I am not a climber or professional hiker, but I would bring rope and some tools as well as beer. Anyway, I saw this little waterfall, but it involved me tying a rope to a tree to help me climb down a steep embankment. Once I was down there, I immediately smelled the stench of something dead. On a large rock, there was a pretty big animal, probably a deer or possibly the remains of a bear, but just totally ripped apart and unidentifiable. Like blown apart or turned inside out but placed perfectly on this large boulder. I immediately climbed out and left the area. As I was headed back towards my car, I heard a strange sound, like a clicking, like an insect but very loud. About a week later, I was back in that area at a secluded swimming spot I had found that was much closer to my car. I had my folding chair in the water and my cooler nearby, and I was just staring down the stream watching the clouds and enjoying nature. I saw something large moving around in the trees. Sounds crazy, but like the movie Predator but slimmer. It was that kind of camouflage. I heard the loud screechy clicking again. I felt like I was being watched. I had a small .22 nearby with a full clip, bears. Before somebody lectures me about guns, these are smaller black bears in Virginia, and the rounds I had were fine. Anyway, got the hairs on my body standing up, I felt like I was being watched. I packed up and left. Another day, I was in that area again and had just pulled off the road to look around, and this time the screeching happened immediately and was louder and more aggressive. Almost like, get the fuck out of here. A month or so later, I was at a cookout in Raphine, Virginia, which is also off 81, and was talking to some old-timers about the area. I felt comfortable sharing my story because one guy had a really convincing ghost story he told us. I told the story about what I saw in the trees, and one guy said he had seen it too while fishing in a stream. He described the noise too, but he said it sounded like a bad fan belt in a truck crossed with clicking. His story was that he felt something behind him and turned around and saw that same blurry camouflage silhouette pass behind him. He described it more like a huge insect body type. I googled all this stuff and went down podcast rabbit holes, and it sounds like what people describe as Glimmerman. I know what I experienced and how it made me feel. I feel like I had some validation too. I was in an abusive relationship from the time I was 18 until I was 20. Not physically abusive, but mentally and emotionally. He was controlling, manipulative, and just downright mean. Our relationship was on and off. He would get mad at me for something, like me going to get lunch with a couple of friends for an hour or two, and break up with me, and then I would stupidly take him back a few weeks later. When I was 20, my dad took his own life. My boyfriend tried to initiate sex the night of his funeral, and I refused. He told me I was being selfish to deny him, and I called him an asshole. He then dumped me 5 days later because I was too emotional and he could not handle it. Well, about a week and a half later, he love-bombed me, and we got back together. We were in the car on the way to get food somewhere, and I was driving, because he did not even have a car. He was yelling at me and berating me for something or other. I honestly do not remember. When I glanced in my rearview mirror, as I normally do while I am driving, I saw my dad sitting directly in the middle of the back seat, staring at me with very sad eyes. I gasped and turned around, and he was gone. My boyfriend was saying, "What? What?" over and over again, and then started yelling at me again. I pulled over and told him to get out. He refused. I had always been very meek, letting him yell at me and control me, and I just took it. But that day, I turned on him in the car, got in his face, and screamed at the top of my lungs, "Get the hell out of my car right now." He actually flinched, went pale, and his face dropped. I wish I could have taken a picture of it. He quietly got out of my car. I locked the doors and drove off. I blocked his number, his Facebook, his email, everything. That was it. A few days later, he tried coming to my house, and I had my older brother answer the door and tell him to go away. I never saw him again. It has now been 14 years, and I have been happily married for almost 7 to an amazing man that I am very sad my dad never got to meet. I still credit my dad for getting me out of that abusive relationship. The day before Thanksgiving in 2020, and the night my ex-boyfriend's mom died, I experienced something extremely strange. Some background: she had always had an addiction issue. She and her husband came into some money, I think stimulus, in October of 2020, and she then left all her children with her mother. There were a lot of issues that led to this, but eventually, my, now ex-boyfriend's dad ended up taking them all in. So fast forward to November 25th, 20, she made plans to visit all the kids at his father's apartment. My boyfriend had a lot of issues with her, and they were not entirely in the best place, so I offered to stay there with him for support. She came around 11 p.m., brought everyone gifts, and I remember falling asleep around the time she was leaving the house. Around 3:30 a.m., I woke up and heard her in the living room. I was confused at first but just assumed something happened with her ride. But I had such an intense feeling that she was leaving right then and my boyfriend needed to get up and say bye to her. I tried to wake him up multiple times, but he would not budge. The entire time, I could hear her saying goodbye to everybody. Finally, the door cracked. It was super dark in the apartment, so I could not really see anything, but I heard her say, "Bye, his name, I love you, my name, please take care of him." I said bye back, and then the door shut. I heard the front door close, and I fell asleep. I woke up around 7 to the news that she had passed at 3:30 a.m. I never knew how to explain it, and it always felt so eerie, but I know I heard her, and it always creeped him out when he remembered that I woke him up at the same time and insisted he say goodbye. My husband's best friend died in a motorcycle accident, so I began caring for his elderly mother. I took her to a little ice cream shop downtown, and a customer at the counter was mumbling to himself. He looked like a retired rock star who had completely fried his brain, with tiny jeans, tank top, long hair, and tattoos. As we were ordering food, he began muttering louder, still mostly incoherent, as he handed the cashier some cash. We figured he did not realize we ordered, so we waited for him to be served and move on. As we went to pay, the cashier informed us that the guy had paid for our order. We turned to thank him, but he was still talking to himself, not really focused on anything at all. As I told my friend we thanked him, that's all we can do, he suddenly looks up, straight at us, and clear as day says, "I just have one thing to say though, it's gonna be okay, ma." Which is something my friend's son would tell her often when she got upset. I grabbed my friend around her shoulders as she gasped. I said, "Wait, what did you just say to us?" But he had already turned away, shaking his head, looking down and muttering again. It was like a radio station. I was home alone in 2006, sitting at my parents' computer just watching YouTube. I listened to a few songs and got a text from a friend that I should come over so we could play football. I went to throw some shoes on, and as I walked towards our front door, I heard my youngest brother call my name. Again, I was home alone, my brother was not even in the city. Before I thought about it, I answered and said, "Yeah, what's up?" Immediately, I remembered I was home alone, and I got this crazy fight or flight response and sprinted out of the door. I was standing in the yard because I launched myself off the porch, terrified. I finally got the gall to go back to the door and lock it. Our front door at the time had a bit of glass in the middle that was like stained glass. As I was locking it, my fight or flight senses went off again, and I felt like I was being watched. Needless to say, I did not come back home until my mom called and said she was home. It still shakes me up because the voice was clear as day, my younger brother, and it was like he was in one of the bedrooms down the hall. I just realized the mouse pad on my Dell laptop is not centered with the keyboard. I swear it was not like that yesterday. As far as dreams go, I had a dream I was swimming in a lake with a snake chasing after me. Just as it opened its big jaws to bite/swallow me whole, I shot up out of bed. Since I was awake, I rolled over to start doom scrolling on my phone, and there was a text from my grandmother that said, "Watch out for snakes." I waited until later to text her a confused, "Huh," and she texted back, "I had a dream last night I was standing on a dock yelling at you to swim faster because there was a snake chasing you." We used to feed a stray cat, would have taken her in, but she refused to come inside and panicked if we tried to pick her up, though she liked being petted. One morning, my significant other was leaving for work and found her lying on our lawn, having obviously been hit by a car. He brought her to the vet, who said there was nothing to do because her injuries were too severe, so they put her down. A few days later, I was outside and saw a cat that I could have sworn was the same one. I called her, and she came over in the hesitant manner that our girl always did, and let me pet her for a moment while I stared at her like, this can't be. It could have been a clone of that cat. A minute later, she seemed to see something in a neighbor's yard because she got still and stared in that direction. She meowed once and ran off. I never saw her again. It's silly, but I like to think it really was her, and she came by one last time to say goodbye. My dear friend Mike passed away back in 1991. We were super close. By definition, we were best friends. I never got to say goodbye to him. This has weighed heavy on me since hearing of his death 30+ years ago. Since his passing, to my recollection, I have never had any dreams which included Mike. Last winter, my wife and I were on vacation in Hawaii. During one of my nights' sleep, I heard a loud, clear knock at the door. I opened the door, and there Mike stood. He looked at me as I did the same to him. We both said nothing, just smiled at each other, then hugged for a short time. Then I woke up. I looked around in disbelief, with tears streaming down my face. I guess that was the closure I had been so desperately yet silently seeking. I love you, Mike. Thanks for stopping in. Summer of 1995, my then 13-year-old daughter and I were in San Antonio, Texas, driving home late at night after a dance recital dress rehearsal downtown near the Alamo. We were stopped at a long red light. I looked out the passenger's side window and saw a man sitting on the ground, his back leaning against a light pole. He was about 25% larger than an average person, similar to enlarging something you print. It took me a minute to realize his size was unusual and to register that he was wearing a big sombrero and old-looking Western clothes, including cowboy boots. He was initially looking down as if asleep. He raised his face up as I watched him. He had tan and weathered skin, a bushy dark mustache, brown eyes, and a peaceful face. It seemed there was a crowd of people around him, and he was illuminated by the light above him. Suddenly, I realized I was looking at Pancho Villa and could see him in great detail. I called out to my daughter, "Look, it's Pancho Villa," recognizing him from pictures I had seen. She saw him too. We looked at each other, then back at him, and he was gone. No one was around, and it was very quiet at about 1 a.m. The stoplight was still red, and it all happened really fast, but it felt like time went backward. One weekend when I was 4, my family was going to my uncle's house for the weekend. My mom told me to pack my suitcase, so I packed my 3 favorite fancy dresses and all my favorite books into my suitcase. My mom came to see what I had packed and told me I had to unpack it all and pack shorts, t-shirts, etc. I started pitching a fit and told her that I wanted to take the stuff I packed because I had a dream that our house was going to burn down while we were gone. She assured me that it would not because it was a brand new house and it was safe. So I repacked my suitcase and we left for my uncle's. After dinner that night, we were watching a movie and the phone rang. It was my great uncle calling to tell my dad that the fire department was trying to save our house, but it was fully involved. I looked at my mom and said, "Told ya." We went home the next day, and our house was burned to the ground due to an electrical fire. I have had several premonitory dreams, but that one was the most vivid. First off, I should mention I'm not religious at all, but this is a strange thing that happened to me nearly 40 years ago. In my first flat, alone, and I was working in my bedroom late at night. Music was on and in the zone when suddenly I froze and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I slowly turned in my seat to look at my shut bedroom door, and it suddenly swung open, revealing the lit hallway down to my front door. Then the light in the hallway went out, and a chill wind hit me in the face as I was looking at the total darkness confronting me. I thought I could see a swirling mass in the blackness, and I realized that I was looking at something absolutely pure evil. I was frozen, just stuck in my seat trying to make sense of what was going on. Then I remembered my girlfriend had a small Bible in one drawer of the desk I was sitting at, and I grabbed it and started reading random pages, and suddenly I felt a warmth and the feeling of dread just disappeared as quickly as it had come. As I mentioned, I'm not religious in the slightest, but I was genuinely terrified of something. Maybe the combination of the door swinging open on its own, the light going out, and the cold wind was just pure coincidence, but at that time, I felt I was visited by absolute pure evil of some form, even though I couldn't actually see anything in the darkness. When I was a small child, around 1984 or 1985, my parents, my 3 siblings, and I lived in a ground floor, 2-bedroom apartment across the street from Lake Superior. My youngest brother was a baby, and his crib was along the wall at the end of the hallway in the living room. The rest of us were in one room, and our parents were asleep in the room next to us. I woke to the sound of my baby brother screaming. It was dark, except for the brightness coming down the hallway from the living room windows. As I walked out into the living room, there was a being with big shiny eyes staring in the window. It was humanoid, but its skin was shiny, dark, and leathery. It just stared at us. I grabbed my brother and took him to our bedroom, and the thing was already at that window. By the time anyone else woke up, it was gone. Years later, when my son was a baby, around 400 miles from that spot, something similar visited his window at his grandparents'. My baby brother, who is now 40 years old, told me one had visited the window of his kids as well. Several things. But one of the weirdest ones was just several months ago. I had my Bluetooth earbuds in while boarding a ferry in my city. One of them fell out of my ear, and I watched it hit the ground, bounce, and then plop off the platform into the water. I literally watched it without a doubt. I kept the case with the single earbud in it, since that one at least was still useful. Several weeks later, I was cleaning my kitchen up, and noticed the earbud on the floor under the table. I thought it was weird that it had fallen out of the case, and picked it up to put it back in its place. I opened the case, and there was the single earbud still in it. I knew it was the same one because I put a unique tiny sticker on each one, and it was still on it. I still cannot explain it. One time a couple of years ago, there was a large explosion sound heard by everyone in my small town, population of about 10,000 year-round. When I heard it, my family and I immediately all turned to each other and asked what that could have been. The house shook a bit with it, and the sound did not have a direction to it. It was just present, if that makes sense. My town has this giant Facebook group that primarily townies and boomers tend to post on, but everyone was flocking to it when the explosion went off, asking each other what happened. Everyone heard it from various different parts of town, and everyone had different theories. Cops ended up saying it was some kids messing around with fireworks on one of our beaches. This was in, I want to say, October or November in a chilly coastal town, mind you. And I have heard fireworks many, many times in my life, and this was not a firework. It was too forceful and all-encompassing, especially considering I do not live on any of the beaches. The closest one is a 5-minute bike ride, but there are plenty of things in between. The one time my grandpa said jokingly, "God, if you're there, show me a sign." The next day, his phone, which was both dead and broken beyond repair, sitting atop a Bible on the kitchen counter, started playing the song, Hallelujah. He picked it up, tried to turn it on, and nothing happened. Obviously, it continued for a minute or so before stopping. We all stood there in the kitchen laughing about how odd and creepy it was, especially since his phone was in shambles and surely not functional. We were sort of put off the rest of the day, not sure whether to be laughing or creeped out. The next morning in church, the pastor gave a sermon on how God sometimes shows up in the most mundane of circumstances. No matter what you believe in, it's something that will stick with me. I did not identify as a Christian necessarily at the time, nor do I now, but regardless, it made me stop and think. I was separated from two friends while exploring a small set of woods southwest of Lincoln, Nebraska. It was Sunday, October 1st, 2017. The sun was in the sky, and a deep ravine and woods were to my left, and tall corn was to my right. As I walked, knowing the area rather well, I was about 10 minutes away from the dirt road that would take me to my friend's cabin. I began to hear what sounded like a group of kids walking, light footsteps, indistinct chatter, laughter, all that, and so I thought I was nearing the road closer than I thought. Perhaps a group of kids were dropped off by the bus that stops every day near this road. It did not occur to me until later that with it being Sunday, kids would not be getting dropped off by the bus. No, eventually the footsteps grew loud and heavy, and began sounding like they came from a single source, and not in front as before, but from the cornfield, behind me. A weird transition in sound that is easier experienced than explained. I then heard what sounded like many children screaming, not in terror but excitement as though on a roller coaster. I turned around to see a purple tail whip above the corn and a loud thud from the dirt, then silence. Maybe the strangest part about it all was the tail immediately reminded me of and looked like a kangaroo's. I did not say anything about it to my friends for 9 months. 9 months later, however, I was in the passenger seat of my friend's vehicle on the same road I was on my way to when I saw it, when he asked if any of us had seen something down there in the woods that looks like a kangaroo, and I lost it. I proceeded to explain to them both the same as I have said here. Searching the internet for Great Plains cryptids, just a few stories of phantom kangaroos are all I found that I am convinced might explain what I saw. Driving back from Taco Bell as a teen with my sister and 3 of our girlfriends. The friend's house we were staying at was directly across from an empty field. We were all 100% sober. There are a couple of streetlights on the side where the field is. I glance over and see a little girl standing under one of the lights. She's blonde with pigtails and a blue dress. I'm thinking, what is she doing out here so late? As we pass, I turn my head toward the girl, but it's not a girl now, it's a dog, and it runs off into the field. I gasp, and my sister in the back seat starts describing the exact same thing, with our other friend jumping in with details, the same exact details I saw. I'll never forget it. I remember when I was a child, I had a dream that my parents and I got in a car crash. I woke up and had a full-fledged panic attack and cried. My mom and dad woke up. Then my mom went to the kitchen to get me some water, and she found the stove was on, probably for hours. Since she cooked dinner at 6, it was on from 6 until around 1 a.m. on full. My dream was around 1 a.m. If I didn't have that dream, maybe the house would have burnt down or come close to burning down. I've run into my mom and a deceased friend in the same woods long after both passed away, my mother in early 2021 and the friend in early 2022. Both passed away due to suicide. These were separate incidents, but at one point in our encounters, both of them separately asked me to follow them. In one particular time, My mom made a gesture as though she would hug me. She told me if I came with her, we could be together again and that everything was going to be alright. I declined each time. I haven't seen them again for about a year and a half. Both were confirmed dead before these encounters, and my mother's remains were cremated, so I don't know who I saw. I didn't attend my friend's funeral, but I, along with everyone else in the area, know he is actually gone. I don't know who they were or how they looked and sounded exactly like my mom and friend. I like to think they visited me due to the fact I was mourning and having a very hard time, but I can't help but wonder if those incidents were paranormal, hallucinations, or imaginary. I've been hooked on learning about the paranormal. I've come to other explanations, but none of them are plausible. I'm just glad I'm still here and that I didn't follow in their footsteps. I wonder if the whole thing was in my head, and that if I followed them as they offered, I would have ended my life.